Hello all, and now for this video we're going to move on to Descartes and talk about the high metaphysics of Western rationality. Obviously Descartes is paid homage for his contribution through the Meditations. And I guess now we can kind of hark back perhaps to, the context of him and, the Renaissance discovering the Hellenic period of Epicurean thought. Certainly that's applicable to Hobbes and what we looked at in the last couple videos. But now you have the emergence of the skeptic texts now coming out of or coming to light into this period. So it's kind of interesting to overlap how now you have Descartes here in this sort of period in the West where you have skepticism through acquired knowledge in the past, just like we saw with Francis Bacon and his questioning of all philosophy prior and the way at which knowledge and the kind of abstraction of generalizations that Aristotle would use in his system. So Descartes obviously is going to branch off and do his own system at a different starting point than the kind of inductive observance of causal natural processes that Bacon is very cautiously trying to, really form the system out of the kind of prudential temperament of really his own context. But with Descartes, he has a different outlook. He's going to try to build conceptions and look for the kind of rational explanation after all these sort of empirical processes that we observe can potentially deceive us. He's, starting out of skepticism, the ultimate sort of skeptic inference point that he's going to begin in the early Meditations. And, it's also important to perhaps look at the sort of way he's going about starting off here as a way to, get everyone to, read through it, as he's going to obviously offer to go in a completely different direction than, philosophical thought prior. He wants to keep the Aristotelians' audience around as he wants to, build his first philosophy. And that perhaps also is something to point out with Descartes. You have this sort of democratic, obviously French-influenced appeal, the kind of philosophy and first philosophy, and its accessibility was really important for Descartes. He wanted people to be able to not only read it, but be able to make sense of it, regardless of one's conviction prior. He wants it to be applicable to as many people as possible. And that's not necessarily true in the way philosophy was done prior. Obviously, Descartes has a sort of libertarian ethos within him of wanting to uncover everything. Knowledge and the kind of Western high rationality. Everything is worth accounting for and trying to make the most of it out of the kind of worrisomeness of being deceived or having the demon, as he would refer to, potentially deceive us. He even questions, whether or not God himself deceives us. So obviously he's going to build the sort of what's termed foundationalism, going through the Meditations as he builds through out of skepticism. He's going to eventually, use this as a logical standpoint to make his next point about whether or not, God exists, whether or not we could be deceived by nature's processes, and what could be considered a kind of hard knowledge that could be agreed upon. What is the most consistent basis that we can agree is a sort of universal? This kind of is a callback to my Western universal original videos, the kind of white universal and the kind of more explicit, sort of provocative title cover. You could definitely critique me on for doing that, but nonetheless, it's this is part of history of actually understanding, and this sort of self-understanding. Descartes is trying to use the axioms of geometry and trying to form hard conclusions out of the plight of trying to make sense of a universal concept. And so math is, at least in his time for sure, something that had the least amount of doubt that he could use to build his system out of. And that's going to obviously lead to the kind of a priori knowledge and the kind of intuitive way in which he's going to argue about concepts of the good, of God, and build from there out of this sort of a priori knowledge, the kind of innate idea, this sort of spontaneous way of understanding. And that's how he's also going to lead into, well, if we can think about God, if we can think about the good and have that sort of intuition, then who are we to perhaps doubt that he would wrong us? And this also is perhaps an interesting starting point to get to another part of Descartes' legacy, and that's obviously one of the dualistic mind and soul distinction, and the parallel away from the kind of material conception of these things. Obviously, we all agree the kind of qualities and subjectiveness. It's not like this is some empirical gotcha. That would be ridiculous. But this is to say, though, that perhaps the mind and the processes and in this sense the a priori knowledge within has a distinction from matter all of its own, and the sort of representational attitude that comes with it is its own experience. And this is perhaps maybe interesting to look off to Oswald Spengler and see how, while he says that Marx obviously dominated thought with the sort of material analysis, there's obviously psychology and the focus of the mind, and that it isn't aware to us of this sort of material causal explanation. And I think perhaps looking at it from that perspective puts weight on the idea of today, where we have these sort of decadence of material and issues of excess access to bad food, you name it. It's easy to see perhaps that that's relevant for us today, and looking back through the 20th century with psychology and understanding the mind and the sort of Descartes kind of legacy of, well, is this spontaneous or is this a priori knowledge? What can we even agree upon within these distinctions of the mind, and how do we content with matter, etc. And another way to perhaps look at this onset of this kind of general video. Obviously, we're gonna do more going forward, and perhaps do individual videos on certain meditations. But it is important to draw that Descartes also is going to have a lot of implication with epistemology and the kind of vestigial legacy of Christian apologetics. When we look back through Aquinas in July, and seeing how he had to contend with, Aristotle and these Platonic texts, and how these Greeks managed to have so much knowledge, prior to revelation and the sort of axioms that were, heading towards Descartes' eventual method. These kind of apologetics and explanations, play hand in hand with the way we would go about knowledge later after Descartes. And perhaps it's also interesting to look at how, Descartes really, in my mind at least, is the summation of, the high Western philosophical tradition. I think he goes all the way as like the kind of hallmark of the Faustian character of overcoming the summit. I think he wants to just, kind of overcome and try to find, true hard knowledge that's even beyond sort of the what, Locke would call the kind of, evidence of these mechanics within nature. But he actually is, more interested in sort of how the awareness comes about within the mind itself. And I think that sort of summit of actually trying to even overcome that is a very powerful thing within us culturally. And I think the implications of that come, politically as well, and trying to contend and draw parallels perhaps with, the idea of us kind of always progressing over prior authorities to us. The idea that our mind's always progressing through these sort of conscious states, and we're always in this sort of upward and progressing direction. At least, this is a romantic, these are romantic period texts, of course, compared to today's world, but you get that kind of attitude within here. And I think that it's important that, and obviously for why we're here even watching or making these videos anyway to begin with, that putting it into its proper context as to how and why the West would go about its own intellectual history and actually admire it in many ways, which I don't think is happening enough in the current state of affairs. So yeah, this was just a little morsel video, I suppose, before we go more in depth on future meditations. I want to perhaps make a couple more videos on these meditations in particular. And this is just kind of an overlapping video giving my own analysis of what I think, and overlapping some models of people like Spangler and etc., like I've done in past videos. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching.